Today's tutorial is about how to balance colors and brightness in an image. And as an example, I show you a little bit of work I did for this photo here, which I took in Australia a few years ago. This here is already the final version, and I'm gonna start off with this here as an example where I will show you how to balance the colors and also the brightness. So for this image, we have very subtle changes or imbalances in color, and I hope you can see this in the video, but actually if you look here at the right side, you see that it's a little cooler. So we have a bluish tint here down in the sand, and maybe I can drop a color sampler here so we can see the color. And you see the blue here is the dominant part. And on the other hand, here on the left side, if I drop a picker here, you can see that there's more red. So red and blue are nearly equal, and you have a little less green. So you have kind of a magenta tint here. So to sum it up, the right side is a little cooler than the left side, but it's not so much, and it's hard to make a very good adjustment just by looking at the image and trying to balance it by using a photo filter. What I'll do now is I create some helpers which help to visualize this imbalance better, and then I can do the adjustment and be much more precise in the adjustments I made. So in selecting the right color for the photo filter. And to do this, I first duplicate this layer and I'll apply a filter on it. So usually all those details in the photo, they distract me from what I want to do. So I'm just interested in the colors and the difference from left to right. So what I can do, I apply a filter on this duplicate, and this filter is the motion blur. And I've already set the angle to 90, so it does a motion blur from top to bottom, and I have the distance at maximum. You can play around with it and just select something which suits you, but for a high megapixel image I have here, I need to go the maximum amount of 2000, which for me works quite well, but you can experiment with this and use something which just takes away enough of the details so they don't distract you and leaves you mostly with the colors. So I press OK, and yeah, this is already a good start, but if I just want to balance the colors, I can add a few more helper layers, and those are interesting. So I'll add an empty layer here and I fill it with 50% gray. By the way, I hit Shift back to get this dialog here, the fill dialog, and here I can select different settings, content aware, pattern, whatever. I'll select 50% gray, and now I have this gray layer. And now I set this one to luminosity, and this leaves me just with the color information in the image. And I already showed this trick in a video I did about filters, where I compared Kase and leaf filters in terms of color cast, and I used this technique to show the color cast. Now I add another filter, which is the hue saturation, and I just increase the saturation, and now I really begin to see a very subtle difference. So what you could hardly make out here just by using those sampler. So looking at this image, I just see, yeah, there's something wrong. So somehow the right side seems a little cooler. But now with those helper layers, I can see exactly what's going on here. So here we have much more red and magenta, and on this side, it's more blue. So with those helper layers in place, and by the way, you can totally create an action for this. So it's just one click and you have them. I'll place a photo filter above this blurred version and beneath those two helpers. So that's important. Now I take a gradient and I go from black to white, and just as a very first try, I do the gradient like this. So black on this side, there's no filter applied. White on this side, the filter is fully applied. So basically that's just the first try to balance those, and we can see the before and after, and it already works quite nicely. So we're getting more into the direction of what we have on the left side. I can also play around and see if One of the other warming filters might fit better, but I think the warming filter is quite good. I can increase the density a bit, so to better align the top parts here. So getting this up. And now I go into the mask, use a black brush and refine it a bit, because down here I went a little too far, so I remove a bit. And also here I don't want the effect of the warming filter because it's already quite warm here in this part. What I can also do, I add another filter and make this a cooling filter. Go with a very low density. I invert the mask so I have it as black. And now I can also balance it by painting a little cooler tones on this side, but I can't go too far. So I think mostly it down here. I frame this a bit with cooler tones, so it's better balanced. Also maybe here I remove a bit of this red and here. So you see, with those harper layers you get a very good impression of the colors in the image, and such subtle adjustments are very easy. So now let's just hide those and also hide this blurred layer. And now I'll put those in a group so we can see the before and after. So the before and after. And now if you have the direct comparison, you can much better see what's changed. You can also go back here and maybe change the opacity of the adjustment you did. So trying to get this a little more convincing. And also with those eyedroppers, which I did, you can also compare again. Now blue and red are similar here on the left side, same as on the right side. So I have a very good balance for the colors now. But what you see now here, also with those pickers here, those are darker than on the other side. So the next thing I'll now do is I'll balance the brightness. And this is very similar. I use this blurred version here. And now I just put a hue saturation layer above it and completely remove the saturation. So I basically have just a black and white image. And now, same as before, I do the adjustments with those harper layers here in place. So I get a curves layer and I darken it a bit, I invert the mask, and now I just darken those areas which I think are unbalanced, and by having this blurred version in place I can clearly see it. Also I use a second layer here, I use this and brighten it, also inverted, so I can work on both. I don't just want to darken, I also want to brighten certain areas, for example up here. So I might brighten this a bit because this side is much darker than on the other side. I might darken this corner a bit, this corner, and also this part. I can also zoom out a little bit more to just work roughly. So this technique, what I'm showing here, it's not for the very fine adjustments. So it's for subtle adjustments which are more or less on larger parts of the image. Okay, so I think we're in the right direction here. Now I can also group those two layers. I deactivate our both help layers here, and now we can see, so the before, now here comes the brightness adjustment and the color adjustment. And let's just group those two so I can deactivate and activate them. Let's zoom a little bit out, before and after. So it's not perfect yet, and I might spend a little more time on this, but this tutorial is about the techniques and also about the helper layers you can use and how to use those. I've showed it, and now you can use them and perfect the technique as you want, as you need. And I'll now show you again the final version just as a comparison. So you see I did a lot more. I added some vignetting. I removed some of the magenta tint and worked a little more detailed on the colors. But the first step was to balance the image. I hope you found the techniques I showed here interesting. Certainly, you don't have to use those hyperlayers every time you want to make color or brightness adjustments to an image. Those are more for such use cases where the changes you want to make are very subtle. When you look at an image and something doesn't feel right, you can better identify what it is by removing distractions, removing the details, zooming out, and then looking at brightness and color separately can be very helpful.